You guys empathize. So this is great to be in here. I'm going to talk for a bit about the history of the campus and the Helen Keller Building, and then you're free to tour the first floor of the building as well as some other ones they're going to tell you about. I want to say thank you first to the Arkansas School for the Blind for allowing us to tour the campus today. Thank you to Superintendent James Caton for all his help providing access to the archives for a talk. And also thank you to former Superintendent Jim Hill and Debbie Mays of Administration for their assistance. This tour is worth 2 hours of health, safety, welfare, continuing education credit through the American Institute of Architects. So if you're interested in getting any of this credit, see me after the tour and I'll take care of it for you. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Superintendent Caton for a minute.
Appreciate all of y'all coming. We're very proud of our campus. Especially appreciate you coming out on such a hot day. We're fast in the process of getting ready for our new school year, of course, that the kids will be back. Staff comes back next week and the kids will be back the following week. You'll see the school really hasn't changed a lot in terms of its buildings. They're pretty much like they were when they were first built from 1939 onward, with very, very few changes. And the interiors are pretty much like they were, except for necessary upkeep and maintenance and different updates like that. But programming has changed at the school over the years, and whereas it used to be strictly more or less vocational and teaching a trade, now our kids, majority of our kids graduate from the school and pursue college and post-secondary education and careers of their choice. So we've come a long ways over the years in terms of our educational programs for them. We are a full academic campus, K through 12 school. A lot of people don't know that, but we meet the same accreditations and standards that public schools meet. So we're very proud of our programs here. We're so glad to have you. And I do want Jim Hill to stand up. This is the gentleman whose place I took. He was superintendent for 19 years, and this is my first year as superintendent this new school year. And a lot of the progress we've made over these past 19 years in our programs has been due to this gentleman. So we appreciate all of his service here at the school. So we hope you enjoy the campus, and again, try to stay cool out there, all right?
All right, just real quick, Mr. Caton has graciously allowed us to access the first floor of the Confederate Soldiers' Home, the Infirmary Building, and the Schultz House, as well as the Gin Mill Cottage here on the campus. And of course, you can tour the first floor of the Helen Keller Building, which is our emphasis today.
The infirmary, they've got a class going on in there right now, but you can foresee that outside.
Scratch the infirmary. Go through the other buildings now. All right, the Arkansas School for the Blind has been here on Markham since 1939, but it has a very long history in the state. The first organized effort in Arkansas to educate the blind was based in Clarksville in 1850. Blind Methodist minister James Chaplin attempted to provide for the education of blind children, but this only lasted 4 or 5 months because he received no assistance and little financial support. By 1859, a more successful effort at instituting a blind school emerged in Arkadelphia. Blind Baptist minister Reverend Houck gained the support of several prominent men in town who called a public meeting in 1858 to form an association. The group launched the Arkansas Institute for the Education of the Blind with 5 students. The institute was incorporated by legislative act, and the men of the association were named trustees with Houck as superintendent. However, there was no financial assistance provided. So the institute rented a private home on the current grounds of Ouachita Baptist University in the location of the present North Dormitory. A private subscription of $1,600 provided the only funds until a legislative appropriation came through in 1861. At that point, Reverend Houck resigned and Professor Otis Patton from the Kentucky Institute for the Blind took over. Patton's emphasis was that the school should not be thought of as an asylum, but rather, in his words, a place where all blind children could lead lives of joyous activity and usefulness. At this point, the enrollment was 3 students, but by the first biennial report in 1860, there were 10 students being offered a curriculum that included typical classes in grammar, reading and math, as well as limited music instruction. Girls were also instructed in sewing, knitting, and beadwork, while the boys learned to make mattresses, brushes, and cork brooms. Of course, by 1863, the situation became unstable in Arkadelphia because of the Civil War. Before the war, appropriations from the state were paid in gold, but it was not sufficient to purchase provisions during the war, and paper money had depreciated. The Institute was able to hold on until September of 1863 because they had a monopoly on the broom trade, and they had enough bead wire to make more than 1,000 brooms until that time. In September, Price's army fell back to Arkadelphia, and the state treasury moved to Washington and Hempstead County, which meant that the school was further cut off from means of state support. They only had $200 of Confederate money left to buy supplies for the winter. Beef prices had risen because it was needed for the soldiers, and groceries purchased before the war had given out. At that point, the trustees were authorized to close the school and send students home. After the war, institution furniture and other property was sold to settle debts, and by 1867 they had reopened with Patton as superintendent. The 1868 biennial report of the Institute states that at that time the state of Arkansas bought the residence of Dr. James K. Rogers in Arkadelphia, and the Institute briefly moved from the original home they had occupied. The school suffered from overcrowding and insufficient facilities, but this was only a portion of the issues with the Institute. Patton advocated to the General Assembly that the school be moved to Little Rock because many didn't know where Arkadelphia was, and it was extremely difficult to get there. Roads were rough, and the Ouachita River provided access only at certain times of the year. He reported that it took nearly a month to get blind students to the school from other counties by ox wagon. The area was so rough they had to walk for miles, and there was nowhere to lodge, so they had to camp in the woods. 1/3 of the pupils stayed at the school during vacation because no one could send for them, and it was unlikely they could get back. Those students who went home said they gave up hope of returning until the school moved to Little Rock. Using his powers of persuasion, Patton reported to the legislature that various Arkansas steamers offered to take pupils to Little Rock for free or at a reduced fare, as did the Memphis and Little Rock Railroad. Hearing his pleas in July 1868, the legislature passed an act approving the move of the Institute to Little Rock. The grounds in Arkadelphia were sold, and all proceeds were used for the rental and purchase of property in the area of 18th and Spring Streets. In November 1868, Patton and 30 pupils took a few textbooks and some equipment to their new home. The trustees rented the home of Mrs. William Fulton, which was called Rosewood, and it was located 1 mile south of the State House. They also purchased 7 acres from her for future growth. It was described as being situated at the top of a rise on Center Street with the Capitol buildings in full view at one end and connected to it by a 1 mile avenue with sidewalks for the use of the students. In keeping with the resistance to references to the school as an asylum, the campus was built for self-sufficiency with the ability to keep livestock, raise a garden, and instruct the children in low-level maintenance labor. In 1869, Major Samuel McCormick was contracted to build a 3-story brick building with a mansard roof. The campus consisted of that building and 4 temporary wood buildings. In 1877, the legislature passed an act to change the name of the school to the Arkansas School for the Blind. By 1884, Patton was reporting that the sleeping quarters of the boys in the schoolrooms were merely wooden shells composed of decaying planks, and the buildings were complete fire traps. The professor's words that the school was the oldest of our public institutions, that instead of being treated as the firstborn, it has eaten the bread of orphanage, resonated with the legislature because in 1885 they appropriated money for the construction of permanent buildings. Architect Benjamin J. Bartlett designed the new 4-story brick building with 2 stories of porches for the Arkansas School for the Blind. It consisted of a large main building with onion-domed clock tower and a pair of 2-story dormitory buildings appended to the central section on the north and south. The cornerstone was laid on the foundation of the new building by the Grand Lodge of Masons. The Masons marched up Center Street toward a crowd on the front lawn where Grand Master W.H.H. Clayton of Fort Smith officiated as items were placed in a tin box within the cornerstone and dignitaries delivered speeches. In the late 1890s, attention was turned to the care of the state's African American blind. Previously, the state had paid rent for apartments for African American children. In 1889, the General Assembly appropriated money for a 2-story building for the Colored Department of the Blind at 11th and Battery Streets with T.R. Ish as principal. African American students lived and were educated in that building until 1949, when a brick international-style building was constructed at 22nd and Madison. This building was also utilized to house African American deaf children. The school stood on that corner with alterations until just recently. In 1965, the school on Markham was integrated and the state's African American blind and deaf children were educated here. In the meantime, the original school for the blind had grown through the years to include several other buildings at the site downtown, but as early as 1918, Superintendent Breaux was asking for a move to a more appropriate building. In 1921, Superintendent George Thornburg was suggesting that the blind school be sold to purchase land and modern buildings. The push for a new school reached an apex in 1937. It was felt that the blind school was dilapidated and out of touch with the needs of education for the blind. The large building with ungraded floors, winding stairways, and hallways were not built with the needs of the blind in mind, and it was dangerous for the students. In that year, the legislature appropriated $150,000 for a new set of buildings on pasture land at the west end of the grounds for the School for the Deaf on Markham Street. An additional appropriation in 1939 and the use of Works Progress Administration labor and funds provided for the completion of 2 buildings at the new plant that year. In the meantime, the original School for the Blind remained empty until the 1947 creation of the Governor's Mansion Commission. The commission chose the site at 18th and Center for construction of the new mansion, and the 1885 structure and associated buildings were destroyed. The center point of the new Markham Street campus was the Helen Keller Building designed by H. Ray Burks. A 3-story brick colonial revival structure housed administration offices, classrooms, and an auditorium. 2-story wings to the east and west of the central section provided dormitories for girls and boys. The auditorium has since been turned into a conference room and offices. The building featured a full-height gabled front porch reached by a split stair. It had stone drip molds over multi-paned windows, a double-leaf front door with fan light, side lights, and stone detail panels of primroses. A louvered cupola with clock face topped the building. The floor plan was graduated so that students could determine when they were passing from the dormitories to the administration building. Water fountains were placed in recesses in the walls, and a small slope was built into the floor to tell students when they were approaching the stairs leading to and from the stage. The flat-roofed 1-story infirmary to the north of the Helen Keller Building was also built in the Colonial Revival-style with WPA funds in 1939. It features a central front door with a heavy surround and recessed side panels. Double-hung windows featured stone drip molds with keystones, and a stone medallion of a caduceus was placed above the front door. And this is one of the buildings that you're welcome to tour, in addition to the first floor of the Helen Keller Building.
He scratched it, there's a cloud.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in the zone. The completion of the first units at the campus was cause for celebration. The administration building's namesake, Helen Keller, was invited to the laying of the cornerstone in the fall of 1939. The Little Rock Lions Club covered all expenses to bring Miss Keller and her traveling companion, Polly Thompson, to Little Rock for the dedication on October 9th. Helen Keller arrived in Little Rock early, conducted an interview with the newspaper, and then retired to her room at the Albert Pike Hotel until just before she was scheduled to speak at 3:30. The ceremony began at 2 o'clock, and on hand were the Little Rock High School Band, School for the Blind Superintendent F.E. Davis, Arkansas Governor Carl Bailey, the national head of the WPA, Colonel F.C. Harrington, the state administrator of the WPA, Floyd Sharp, and other local dignitaries. Hundreds of attendees took seats on the front lawn as speeches began on the front porch of the Helen Keller Building under gathering storm clouds. The cornerstone was laid by Grand Master of the Masonic Grand Lodge, C. Eugene Smith, and items were placed within. Rain threatened to break up the ceremony, but Governor Bailey pleaded with the audience to stay, and a group of spectators crowded into the auditorium. Speaking through her interpreter, Ms. Keller appealed not for charity for the blind, but for the opportunity to learn useful occupations, and asked that the legislature continue to provide appropriations. She took questions, and immediately after the ceremony, Ms. Keller left by train for retirement in Connecticut. Further construction by the WPA included the 1940 edition of the Industrial Building. It's a one-story flat-roofed brick building with minimal Colonial Revival details. It's used as the maintenance shop for the school today. In 1942, it was expanded with WPA funds to provide room for mattress assembly. The high school girls' dormitory, today known as the Gin Mill Cottage, was also funded by the WPA and designed by architect Tom Harding and was completed in 1942. It was designed in a minimal Colonial Revival configuration, which was similar to the industrial building, and it's currently used to house new parents of students from birth to 3-year-old program headquarters and can go to the school. Additional construction did not occur until the Soldiers' Home was built at the campus in 1954. In 1889, the ex-Confederate Association of Arkansas was formed, and a homestead and sweet home was purchased to house Civil War veterans and eventually widows and daughters of soldiers. In 1890, appropriations were provided for construction of a new home on the site designed by McAllister and Harper of Little Rock. The home increasingly deteriorated through the years, becoming infested with bed bugs and posing a fire threat to the residents. So in the 1940s, the Board of Trustees sold bauxite from the property to pay for a new building on the campus of the School for the Blind. The deal was that the Confederate home could have the property for its building if it would be turned over to the school when it was no longer needed as a home. In 1954, architectural firm Trapp, Clippard & Phelps designed the new Confederate soldiers' home in the Colonial Revival-style with full-height front porch on the 2-story center section and stone drip molds over metal multi-pane double-hung windows. The building featured 2 one-story angled wings and heavy stone cornices of modillions. By 1953, the residents were mostly daughters of Confederate veterans and only a handful of widows. While the new home was being built, the remainder of the residents were housed in the hospital at Camp Robinson. In 1963, so few patients remained that the board transferred the title to the school, and those ladies left were placed in nursing homes. At that time, 15 multi-handicapped students received instruction in the building. In 1971, an annex was built to the rear for classrooms. An act of the legislature decreed that the sign for the Confederate Soldiers' Home, which came from the building at Sweet Home, will forever and eternally be displayed at the campus. And we are able to tour the first floor of this building today as well. In 1958, the superintendent's residence in the ranch style and the boys' dormitory Pruitt Hall, featuring a recessed entrance and stone screening, were built on campus. The original Colonial Revival Gymnasium was also built that year, but by 1979 it was destroyed for the new Hartman Gym. The 1970s was another period of growth with the construction of the Neo-Colonial Revival Schultz House in 1971, and you are able to tour the first floor of that building today. Huckabee Hall was built to the west of the Helen Keller Building in 1975, and in 1977 the Woolley Fine Arts Building, which is where we are now, was constructed. So, when you get out there on the grounds, I want you to be sure to go into the Helen Keller Building, to the conference room, take a look at historic photographs and items that are displayed there. Also, note, we're going to pull the screen up, and note the 1906 pipe organ, which was moved from the original building here to the Fine Arts Building, and that's part of the organ there. The pipes are back here. Notice the original Masonic cornerstone from the 1885 building in front of the Helen Keller Building, as well as the 1988 lion sculpture by Kathy Ayers Zimmerman, which features tiles handmade by students, and that's also in front of Helen Keller, just about where you came in. And lastly, note the roller rink, which was built for the girls on the east side of Helen Keller, which was turned into an herb garden in 1965, as well as the cemetery and the circle to the east that contains unknown burials of students and perhaps faculty from both schools, the blind and the deaf. That is the Arkansas School for the Blind, and you're free to tour the buildings at your leisure. And thank you.
Could you step back one?
Go back one.
I think we skipped it.
Did I?
Oh, yeah.
I have my back turned. So that's the roller rink, and then the cemetery up there.
Buildings, but I have no idea of the grounds. Is there someone that's going to point them out, or is there a map or directions or something?
We have the people that will direct you the way to go.
My understanding is the old Easter Seal building at the end of Lee Street belongs to the blind school, and I know I bicycled by there, and it looks like the building's being torn down, maybe, or there were plans for that property or area.
Yeah, that building is in the progress that it will be demolished. That is the plan for that building.
And then what will happen with that property there?
Well, it will remain here with the school until we decide what we want to use it for in the future, but hopefully it will remain a green space.
Map shows a racetrack on one of the maps, and then in the aerial, it looked like, is that the skating rink?
No.
On the original, and then that last one you showed, it looked like it was a racetrack, and I didn't know if that was the skating rink.
That's the roller rink.
It's in the racetrack.
No,
Oh,
go
you're talking
back
about the
more.
original. Yeah, it was a racetrack